Apple just concluded their Worldwide Developers Conference, and there's a lot to talk about, except for the Apple Watch, but we'll get into that later. So here's a recap of the biggest announcements and some of the things that they didn't mention on stage. We'll start off with iOS, and boy oh boy did they spend a lot of time on this, and for good reason. There's a lot of changes this year. One of the biggest changes to iOS that you'll see is right when you pick up your phone, the lock screen. You can customize it to look and feel however you want to a certain extent. There's still, you can't put the time anywhere or anything like that, but you can make a lot of changes to really personalize the experience that you have. The layout is really similar to what the Apple Watch is like. You can have live updating widgets, you can have a whole weather lock screen, you can have a lot of different things. You can change the font style, the color, you can have it match a background, you can change the background of the photo that you have just on the lock screen right there. There's a lot of customization that you can do on the new lock screen. And there's a new gallery to choose what different combinations of fonts and colors and styles that you want for each different wallpaper and lock screen that you have. There's a lot of changes to notifications as well. There's a live activities feature now that instead of just sending you, notification after notification after notification for a basketball game or any sports related game, they really emphasize that. Instead of that, you now just have a bar at the bottom of the screen that's just a live updating score that you don't have to worry about the notifications bouncing back and forth on your phone. Another big update is messages. You can now edit your messages after you've sent them, which I feel like is a little stab at Twitter for not being able to edit tweets and stuff like that. But you can do it. And you can undo send just like you would on like an email or things like that. You can do it right in iMessage. And you can mark things as unread. That way, if you read it now, but you know you want to respond to it later, you can just mark it and it's good to go. They made a lot of quality of life improvements to iMessage this year. There are a lot of smaller updates to iOS as well. With dictation, you can now type and talk at the same time, so it doesn't just take up the whole keyboard when you want to talk something out and type at the same time. There's a new thing called Visual Lookup, which in an image, you can select just something like a dog or something like that, and just copy that into something like a message, and you don't have to worry about the background or anything like that. There's smaller updates to Apple Maps and Apple Wallet, and sports are now integrated pretty well into the Apple News app, so you can follow just a single team that you want. They made some updates to family sharing, so it's easier to set up devices for your kids and whatnot. And with photos, it's now easier to share stuff with your family. Now, you could kind of already do this with a shared album, but they're kind of expanding the reach of what that looks like. Now, if you're part of the same album with someone and you're near them, you can take a picture and automatically select that you're wanting to put it in that album just from that photo that you're taking. They talked about privacy a lot because they're Apple, but one feature I really want to highlight is called Safety Check. It's aimed at those trying to escape abusive relationships, that they can just quickly cut ties with the abusive partner and leave and not have to worry about access to their accounts or passwords or location or anything like that. It's a quick, easy sever, and you don't have to worry about the other person tracking you with your phone because you shared your location with them. They made some updates to HomeKit and are introducing a connectivity standard called Matter that they're developing with a lot of other companies in collaboration. So I don't know much about that and about HomeKit in and of itself, but we'll get into content like that a little down the road on the channel. And a big feature is CarPlay. CarPlay is getting expanded a lot. Now, the thing with it is it takes over a lot of screens, more than just your center console one. It takes over the dashboard, so you can kind of customize it to your look and feel and how you want. There are a lot of different layouts that they showed. There's a lot of personalized stuff that you can do with the new CarPlay. You can make it look how you want and feel how you want on the dashboard, in the center console, in a lot of other places. And they didn't really show it with a specific vehicle. At least there were no logos or anything, and they didn't say anything about what vehicle it was in the photos. So I assume they're just imagining a car with a bunch of screens because they showed a lot of content on those screens. There's some pretty cool updates with CarPlay, but I think we'll have to see those in action in an actual vehicle before we can decide whether or not they're actually good updates to have, and whether or not it works, and whether or not it works as they say it does. They say that iOS can kind of just detect what the dimensions are of the screen and, change the layout based on that. We'll see how it is in practice. In theory, it looks awesome, and it sounds like a really cool idea to personalize your car even more, but we'll have to wait until at least late next year to see what it looks like. So overall, there are a lot of changes to iOS this year to make it a lot more personable, and there's a lot more that we aren't going to get in depth in because they're very small, minute things. But one thing that they didn't announce was that the compatibility for iOS 16 jumps a couple generations of iPhone and starts at the iPhone 8 or the iPhone SE2, but it jumps over iOS 15's support of the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 7 and just goes straight to the iPhone 8. I kind of get it because they've been holding on to that compatibility for the iPhone 6 for quite a few generations now. And I actually have a video of me switching from the iPhone 6S Plus to the iPhone 12 Pro Max. And let me tell you, it was a big leap. It was the first video on the channel. It was out over a year ago, so you can check that out in the corner here. But yeah, if you have an iPhone 7 or earlier, you're not going to be able to get the new iOS 16. Now we move on to watchOS 9. There's not a lot of changes here, really. The big upgrades are more watch faces, like they do every year. You get some small tweaks and notifications. The workout app gets a little change to it. They really focused on running and the changes that they made to the exercise running in the app and what it looks like on the watch and everything. The sleep app gets a good improvement because I don't use it. I don't know how many people use it, but it's finally getting to show you what sleep stages that you're in overnight. So you know whether you're in REM sleep or how deep sleep you got and things like that, which is a good metric to see like if you're actually getting deep and good sleep, and if you're not, probably should make some changes or talk to your doctor about it. But now you know, at least from what the Apple Watch can tell you. And there's some new health stuff that they talked about, and that the Apple Watch can detect atrial fibrillation, and they have that history in the health app now. They talked about a new medication support in health that can tell you if there's a drug-on-drug interaction with a couple of different things that you're taking and what the severity of those things look like, so you can talk with your doctor about those things. So there's not really a ton of new stuff. They didn't spend much time on watchOS in the presentation, so we're just going to skip ahead. Compatibility starts at Series 4 and onwards, and that's really about it. Next, we get to macOS Ventura. They have a new thing called Stage Manager, which instead of having like a dozen apps or so open on the desktop as it is, they actually all just go to the side when you're using one, and you can easily flip between what apps you want to use and things like that. They did some changes to Spotlight. There's an enhanced image search. There's just a new layout to it. It looks a little better, a little cleaner. And another big thing that they surprisingly spent a good amount of time on is gaming for the Mac, which sounds very counterintuitive. I don't know really that many people or any people that game on a Mac besides, iPhone games and things like that. But they really tried to push gaming on a Mac as an actual thing, especially with Macs with Apple Silicon. They talked about the Metal engine and that they have this thing called Metalfx Upscaling, which upscales content from like 1080p to 4K or 720 to 1080p. It sounds similar to AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution and NVIDIA's Deep Learning Super Sampling. Really, what it is an upscaler that makes things look better and play better, and you'll get higher frame rates on your Mac when you're playing No Man's Sky and Resident Evil 8. Two wildly different games, and it's surprising that they're both coming to the Mac, which is pretty cool, but I don't know of many people that will game on it, but we might give it a try. Another big thing that they talked about is continuity. You can hand off a FaceTime call from your phone to your Mac if you want to sit down and talk to someone for a long while. That's a pretty cool thing. But the biggest thing, I think, for macOS is now you can use your iPhone as a webcam. I've been wanting this for a long time, and it's pretty cool that they're finally doing it. And there are a lot of companies that are trying to do that to varying degrees of success, but I haven't found an easy way to just use my iPhone as a webcam, because we have this, super nice, I think it's 12 megapixel still camera and everything, but still, it's a camera. It looks a lot better than the, some 720p webcams and 1080p if you have a nice new fancy laptop and things like that. But you can easily use an iPhone as a webcam. And a really cool thing that they talked about is called Desk View, and it uses the ultra-wide lens on your iPhone to have like a top-down view. It looks like you have a separate camera looking down and having a top-down view of your desk. And we'll see how that is actually in practice. I don't know if it's actually going to work and be good, but we're going to try it out once that software becomes available. And speaking of the Mac, they announced the next generation of Apple Silicon with the M2 chip. Now, this is the base model chip. It replaces the M1, and it can do quite a few things more than the M1 can. The M1 had a a capacity of 16 gigs of RAM for the base model, and now that gets up to 24 with the new M2 processor. There's some, nice shiny specs that they have: 100 gigabit per second memory bandwidth. There's an 8-core CPU, up to 10-core GPU, 16-core neural engine. They say the CPU is about 18% faster than the M1, and the GPU is up to 35% faster than the M1. They have their high-performance media engine and the ProRes encoder and decoder, so you can do ProRes video editing on the new MacBook Air that they're launching. It's totally redesigned. It looks a lot like the new MacBook Pros that they announced last year, the 14 and 16 inch. And it looks pretty nice. It's got MagSafe, it's got Thunderbolt ports, and it's got the high impedance headphone jack taken from the MacBook Pro's Mac Studio. They say there's about a 20% reduction in volume from the previous MacBook Air, and it's only 2.7 pounds. And it also has a notch in the screen up at the top where the toolbar is, similar to the 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pros from last year, which is a choice. I was thinking that they would hold that out for like the Pro model stuff, but really, I guess it's just notch city all day long with all of Apple's products. But the 13 inch MacBook Pro is still around, and it won't have a notch. It's still the same form factor that it's been. It just has the M2 processor in it now, which is interesting. I would have thought that they would have phased that out since they have the 14 inch MacBook Pro out now, which is almost the same size, just a little bit different. And this new MacBook Pro doesn't have the same design language as the new MacBook Air or the 14-inch MacBook Pro. It kind of is a holdover from the previous generations of MacBook Pros that has that, nice thin design and everything. And it has fans and everything, and it's only $100 more than the new MacBook Air. But it just is interesting that they're keeping it around. You might get a little more performance out of it, but it's hard to tell whether or not those numbers are compelling enough to justify a $100 premium over it. The touch bar is still alive, which, depending on your thoughts on it, sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's not so good. It depends on your experience with it, honestly. But it's staying around. It gets the M2, just like the new MacBook Air, and you have more choices now. And that's probably what this is about, because they made a point to say that the MacBook Air is the world's best-selling laptop, and the world's second best-selling laptop is that 13-inch MacBook Pro. They're keeping things around, probably just for that reason, because they sell so well for them. And the last big update of everything is iPad OS 16, which is a long name, but they actually did quite a number of changes to it that makes it just like on the border of being macOS, but it's not. And they've been adamant in the past about saying that iPadOS and macOS are never going to merge together, but it's so close. Why are they distinguishing the two so much? The first announcement that they made is that a weather app is finally coming to the iPad, and it looks really nice and really good. It's crazy to think that that is such a big deal for people, but it's exciting nonetheless. Nice big screen to see all the weather things and stuff like that. They have this new thing called collaborations, and it's when you can share a document and collaborate with other people in that document and not have to worry about, selecting, I want to send it to this person and this person and this person. You can just invite them to a collaboration. It's just an easier way of sharing things with other people and working on a project together in like Pages or Keynote or things like that. Another change that they're making to FaceTime is this thing they call Freeform, which is kind of just a whiteboard space that you can invite others to and collaborate together while you're FaceTiming, so you can draw in one place and someone's, down in the corner over here. Okay, let me see what they're working on. Oh, okay, I'm going to go over here. And as we talk and collaborate, we all have this giant whiteboard space on our iPads that we can just talk together and talk things through, which is cool, especially if you're a remote worker and you don't have the luxury of being in an office with someone and being able to draw something, an idea out on a whiteboard or anything. You have that space now. Another thing that they mentioned was having desktop class apps on the iPad. And that makes everyone think that Final Cut Pro and the Pro apps that they have on the desktop are coming to the iPad and the iPad Pro, but no. It's kind of just updates to files and find and replace and more desktop features that they didn't have fully fleshed out on the iPad. It's really just small improvements that they're making over time. You can customize toolbars and things like that, but it's really just minor changes instead of making, bringing big desktop class apps like Final Cut Pro and whatnot onto the iPad. they're not doing that. They're also bringing some performance features for iPads with the M1 chip, which is the iPad Pro and the iPad Air. They have a display scaling setting, and they're also bringing that Stage Manager feature from macOS into iPadOS if you have the M1 chip in your iPad. Kind of looks like if you hook up an M1 powered iPad into an external display, you can easily multitask and things like that with up to 8 windows. So that's a recap of everything that they talked about at WWDC. There are a lot of smaller details we didn't quite get into in the video, but I hope that this has given you some perspective as to what's coming down the line, and if you might need to upgrade your iPhone if you want all those new features and everything. Either way, that's it, and I'll see you guys next week.